Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we are going to look at an announcement coming out of Netflix and Amblin Studios, or Amblin Entertainment. And most people would know that as that's Steven Spielberg's main production company. Anytime you have a Steven Spielberg film, they're the ones that always have the logo up in front. And their logo is the name Amblin, but in the corner you have the little shot from E.T. where E.T. is in the bike and he's flying and he's up by the moon. Most people would probably definitely recognize the logo, maybe not the name. But Amblin has signed a deal with Netflix for multiple films each year. Now, I'm not sure how many years this deal is for. It doesn't actually mention how many years this is slated for, but they have a contract with them right now to develop what they're calling it is multiple films. Now, there's a couple of things that make me question this a little bit just from a production house standpoint. Now, Netflix is basically the equivalency almost of a Hollywood studio at this point in terms of the budget of the films that they are able to do and in the mass that they are able to do it in. Speaking of that, actually, there is another thing that they do not mention in this, which is what they're paying Amblin to do this, because that's another thing too. Now, Amblin has always worked with studios for the most part. I think they're also developing a project for Apple TV right now. But outside of that, I don't think they've done anything else that's been specifically marketed at streaming. So this will be interesting. But I mean, like I said, they've done every kind of Spielberg film. They've done all of them basically after I think it was. I think E.T. actually may have been the first actual Spielberg film that they did, but I know they did Poltergeist, and I think one before that. So they do have a lot of production history. The studio itself is it's 40 years old now. This would be 40 years this year, I believe, unless it was founded in 1980. But the first film came out in 81, so that's kind of what I went by. But regardless of that, the whole thing is that Amblin has never been like a production house studio, let's put it that way. They've never been a studio that just churns out product after product after product after product. They do make a good amount of movies. They have a long filmography, but the difference is that they only put out about 2 to 3 movies a year. They're not a massive production house. And again, most of the time they're only putting out movies that are involved with Steven Spielberg. There's a handful of them that they've done that haven't been with him involved. So you're saying that 2 out of a possible maybe 3 to 4 movies are going directly to Netflix. Now, not a minimum of 2. We're not talking about, it could be more than that as well if Netflix tries to up the ante. But the other thing is that that's a lot to ask of a studio like that. And then on top of that, you also have several Steven Spielberg projects that are in the pipeline. He's doing, I think, an autobiographical thing at some point. And I think he's also set to film another movie not too long. And his film, his remake of West Side Story is supposed to release, I think, this December or November. So they're still enthralled in a lot of products, and they probably have a lot of other ones that are in the in the working phases right now. So there's going to be a lot of work on the table for Amblin Studios. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the other thing is that Netflix is expecting this year after year after year. Again, we don't know how long this contract is listed for. So if that's the case, then you're going to wear out a studio unless you maximize that staff. Now, this deal might also cover that. It might say like, okay, well, Netflix will provide money and crew and sets and stuff like that to Amblin if they require it, just certain other things. It could be that, if Netflix has to give a helping hand, they will. In terms of the production. Obviously, they're going to have a hand in the financing because this is going directly to Netflix. So Netflix is going to be probably buying these properties, and I would assume because of the way that most deals work, it's probably going to be at a bit more of a discount than what's been happening in the past, because that's kind of a similar thing where Netflix has picked up properties, and they've had to pay a buttload for them. Look at Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, which I think after everything was said and done, that movie had over a $200 million budget, and a lot of that was for the production, which is why a lot of major Hollywood studios wanted nothing to do with that movie. It was I think it was 120 something for the regular production fees, and then Netflix also had to pay Universal Studios another 120 million, or 100 or so million, in order to get the rights to the movie, in order for them to actually own it. Because originally it was greenlit at Universal, and Universal didn't want it anymore, so they sold it off. So Netflix has a habit of chucking money at things. So it is possible that maybe they did not make the best business decision, which again I could see that. But Amblin is also going to have to deliver on this deal. So that's the other problem I think that is going to come up in this, is that if you start missing dates, if you start getting pushed back for whatever reason, because Netflix is kind of like a Marvel Studios or a Disney in general, is they just churn out products, or they churn out content. I guess, everybody hates that word. I hate that word sometimes too, but that's really what it is, because a lot of it is not very substantive. But they just push out content after content after content that they're throwing a buttload of money at. They also had the preview for Red Notice today, which is coming out of them. That has an over $200 million budget. That Extraction movie that they had with Chris Hemsworth, that had a ridiculous budget, if I remember correctly. I'm pretty sure that was well over 150 million. And then you had a whole bunch of other movies that they've been doing too, that they've been dumping cash into. Now, to be fair, they did have a massive spike in their stock value as soon as the pandemic hit, because everybody started using streaming services more and more, and the movie theaters were shut down. So they got a very, very stiff cash flow right there, but they've been spending like madmen for years. So in addition to that, also too, they have the Benioff and Weiss contract that they stole them away from Lucasfilm for $200 million just for the contract. That's before they even start making anything. Which, by the way, I haven't heard anything about what they've actually been making on Netflix. If anything, they could have just taken the $200 million and said "F you" and left, for all I know. But regardless of that, I'd be curious to see if Netflix starts making more deals with other studios. Or other production houses, because this is the other thing too, is that Steven Spielberg was very critical of Netflix at one point, especially when Netflix was trying to push for some of their films to be nominated for Oscars. This was about 2 or 3 years ago, and when he started making that push, he often said, like, you shouldn't, it should have to have a wide release or something like that. It can't just be in one little theater for a weekend just to qualify, which is really what Netflix would do with their Oscar bait movies, is they'd put them in all these little art house theaters that were around Los Angeles and other areas in Southern California or in New York, and then they would have them get seen there, and that would be the equivalency of getting a theatrical run, or at least so they could check the box, quote unquote. Or they would have a limited release, maybe something at like Sundance and stuff. That's usually where a lot of those would get picked up, is Sundance, or because that's really the biggest indie film, even though it's not really an indie film place anymore. But at one point it was. But that's really where all the Hollywood studios go to cull the Oscar bait. Maybe they should start looking in other places. But regardless of that, the whole thing here is that Netflix could very easily wear out this relationship fast, and this relationship could very clearly crumble very fast. So I'm not 100% certain on this as a business decision. I don't necessarily think that this is, from a money standpoint, it's probably great, at least for one of the two parties. Netflix might be overpaying, and Amblin might be saying, no, I'm cool with that. It could be. But at the same time, you still have that whole wrinkle with Spielberg. But again, they're all starting to drift over into the streaming part of it, even the ones that vehemently hate it. Like I said, Scorsese has been very, very vocal about his disgust for the way the Hollywood system has evolved. I've been over that in previous videos before. Spielberg has voiced his concerns. I think Robert Zemeckis has voiced his concerns. A lot of other really Renaissance directors from the 70s, 80s, and 90s are very much in agreement that they do not want to go over exclusively to streaming, because they still do love the theater experience like a lot of us do. But it's still it's an interesting little business thing. There's a lot of wrinkles in it, and just the fact that Spielberg is involved with his little, when he had his little back and forth with Netflix a few years ago, kind of just shows, what the industry is. It's the idea of like, okay, we don't like streaming, but it's a moneymaker, so screw it. It's kind of you get in the bed with the devil. You realize that it's probably better to do that and make money, and then maybe get out if it starts to tank, which I don't think it's going to tank at this point, but still. But that's just kind of my thoughts on this. I want to know what yours are. Are you familiar with Amblin Studios? I think almost everybody is, at least from the movies that they've produced. Or the movies they've made, and also their relation to Spielberg. But do you think this is a good decision? Do you think this is a bad decision? Do you think that this is a predecessor to things that are come? Is Netflix going to start buying up other smaller studio or making deals with other smaller studios so that they can keep up with their content flow? Put your thoughts in the comments below. As usual, I like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications. Hit the like button. Subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?